Imagine sitting in your living room on a rainy Sunday, surrounded by old boxes from the attic, dusty, forgotten relics of the past. One of them is marked in faded marker, Family Videos, 1994. You pop in the VHS tape just for nostalgia's sake, expecting birthday parties, backyard barbecues, and Christmas mornings filled with awkward sweaters and plastic toys. But then, at exactly the 43-minute mark, someone hits pause. Everyone in the room goes silent. There's a blurry figure in the background, someone no one can place. Someone who shouldn't be there. The tape jitters slightly, but when you freeze the frame again and zoom in, hearts start pounding. Because what you see isn't just a photobomber or a neighbor who moved away. It's a face. A face that looks eerily familiar. And someone in your family whispers, "That looks like Uncle Mark, but he disappeared in 1995. That's where it begins, the moment a harmless home movie turns into a decades-old missing persons mystery, and your family starts questioning everything they thought they knew. Now, before we go any deeper, I want to tell you something straight. The reason you clicked on this video, the question that immediately popped into your head when you saw the title, yes, you're going to get the answer. Not just a vague theory or a what-if, but the actual truth behind what this family found and what it led to. You and I are going on this journey together. And I promise you, by the end of the story, you'll know exactly why that freeze frame changed everything. But I need you to stay with me. This isn't just a story, it's a chain reaction. A moment frozen in time that unlocked secrets buried for over 2 decades. And trust me, there's a part of this that no one saw coming. Let's be honest, there's something about old tapes that just gets under our skin. Maybe it's the flickering screen, the warbled audio, the way faces from the past look ghostly through static. VHS isn't just a format, it's a time machine. It doesn't lie. It captures things exactly as they were, even the things we weren't supposed to see. And that's what makes this story hit so hard. Because this wasn't a documentary. It wasn't filmed with any purpose other than to remember a birthday party in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. It's the kind of thing we all have sitting in drawers somewhere, a forgotten archive of everyday life. But when one family decided to revisit the past, they didn't expect the past to stare back. Meet the Lambert family. If you're from the Midwest, you probably know a family just like them. Hardworking, tight-knit, normal by all definitions. Dad worked construction. Mom taught second grade. 3 kids spaced about 4 years apart. Nothing flashy. Just real, everyday life. Until one of them went missing. Mark, the fun uncle. The one who always brought magic tricks to holidays, who played guitar and made every kid in the neighborhood laugh. He vanished one summer after telling the family he was heading to Colorado for work. He never came back. No calls. No sightings. No body. Just silence. At first, they thought he was just drifting, trying to find himself. But as months turned into years, they quietly assumed the worst. And life moved on except for the guilt, the wondering, the whispering about what really happened. And then, 2 decades later, during a Sunday cleaning spree, that tape surfaced. The real twist here isn't just what they saw in the tape. It's what they did after they saw it. Because when you're faced with something impossible, when a man who's been missing for 20 years suddenly shows up on camera looking straight at you, you don't just shrug it off. You question everything. And that's exactly what the Lamberts did. But here's where it gets even more haunting. As they dug deeper, they realized this wasn't the only tape. There were more. And each one had clues, tiny, chilling pieces of a bigger puzzle that had been hidden in plain sight all along. One of them even had a date on it that didn't make sense. A scene that couldn't have happened. And a voice in the background that was supposed to be gone. You might be wondering, why didn't anyone catch this earlier? Why didn't police connect the dots? Why didn't the family notice something strange back then? All good questions, and they'll all be answered. But what you need to know right now is that the story doesn't end with the tape. That was just the spark. What followed was a deep dive into old footage, long-forgotten letters, voicemail tapes, and eventually, a hidden room no one knew existed. And yes, there's even a police report involved. An investigator who remembered the case, and something he said that chilled the family to their core. If you've ever been haunted by something unresolved, if you've ever felt like the past wasn't done with you yet, then this story is going to hit home. This isn't just a mystery. It's a slow unraveling of what happens when the truth is buried beneath years of silence and grief. The deeper the Lamberts dug, the more complicated things became. At first, it was easy to write off the appearance on the VHS tape as a trick of the light, maybe a lookalike caught in the frame by coincidence. But it wasn't just a passing glimpse. The man, standing half in shadow behind the picnic table, just outside the crowd of singing relatives and dancing kids, stood still. Not smiling, not moving, almost as if he was watching. And the resemblance was uncanny. The hairline, the jaw, even the crooked grin he showed just before the screen went black. It was Mark. It had to be Mark. But that wasn't possible. According to every official record, Mark had vanished in August 1995 after leaving his job site in rural Indiana. His old truck was found days later near a rest stop off I-70, abandoned with the keys still in the ignition. No wallet, no signs of foul play, and no trace of where he went next. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Back then, there were theories. Some in the family whispered that Mark had gotten into trouble with the wrong crowd. Others thought he might have been struggling with mental health, or maybe got hooked on something he couldn't shake. But what made things so frustrating was that there was no clear trigger. His girlfriend at the time, Jessica, told police that the last time she saw him, he seemed completely normal, talking about a new job, joking about road tripping to Arizona, even mentioning plans to visit his nieces. He had made no mention of disappearing. There were no tearful goodbyes, no notes, no calls after. Just one man gone. And now there he was, frozen in time on a VHS tape that, according to the timestamp, had been filmed 2 months after he vanished. That was the detail that shook them all. Because the tape was supposed to show a September birthday party for the youngest Lambert kid. A party Mark wasn't at. Or at least, that's what everyone remembered. But somehow, there he was, on the edge of the screen, looking directly at the camera as if he knew it was rolling. The first instinct was denial. Maybe the tape was mislabeled. Maybe the date was wrong. But after checking with several relatives, going over calendars, even finding a printed invitation from 1995 buried in a scrapbook, it was clear. The date was correct. And suddenly, all those years of assumed closure shattered like glass. They started asking questions again, ones they hadn't voiced in decades. Did Mark leave on purpose? Was he hiding from someone? Was he being hidden by someone? A trip to the local sheriff's office brought more frustration than clarity. The detective who originally worked the case had long retired, but a younger officer pulled up the old file. No updates since 2001. No new tips. But when they showed him the tape and the paused frame, he leaned in. He didn't say it out loud, but you could see the hesitation in his eyes. He saw it too. The resemblance. The possibility. That seed of doubt. He agreed to reopen the case, unofficially at first. And that's when things started to get strange. Phone calls with no voice on the other end. A letter in the mailbox with no return address. Just a single sentence typed on yellowing paper. He's not who you think he was. The family brushed it off at first, assuming it was someone playing a sick joke. But then someone noticed that a few boxes in the attic had been moved. Not stolen, just shifted slightly. As if someone had been up there looking for something and didn't want to be noticed. Paranoia set in. Doors were double-locked. Motion lights were installed. And still, the questions only grew. Jessica, Mark's ex, agreed to meet with the family again. It had been over 20 years, and she had since moved to another state, remarried, and started a new life. She was hesitant, visibly nervous, but said yes when she saw the still image from the tape. Her reaction was immediate. Her hands trembled, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. "That's him," she said finally. "I don't know how, but that's Mark." When pressed for more, she admitted something she had never told anyone before. A week after he disappeared, she received a voicemail from a payphone. It was muffled, short, barely audible. But she swore it was his voice. He said, "Jess, I'm okay. Don't try to find me." And then the line went dead. She told no one. Not the police.
not his family.
She assumed it was part of the grieving process, her mind playing tricks.
But now?
She wasn't so sure. Still, not everyone believed it. Mark's brother, Caleb, a former Marine and the eldest in the family, remained skeptical. He insisted someone was playing with them, that Mark was either gone or had chosen to leave for reasons they were better off not knowing. He warned against stirring up the past. But even Caleb couldn't deny that the figure on the tape looked like his brother, just older, thinner, a little rougher around the edges. As the investigation continued, the family turned to old home movies, watching hours of footage to find anything, any clue, any sign they missed before. What they found instead were patterns. Small inconsistencies. Shots where the camera would pan slightly too fast. Scenes where someone seemed to be standing just off frame. A voice that whispered something indistinct in the background. Details that felt off like they had been left there on purpose. But as with any mystery, not everything added up. The more they searched, the more possibilities emerged, some helpful, some misleading. One neighbor recalled seeing Mark weeks after he was declared missing, walking near an abandoned motel outside town. But the motel had since burned down, and no one else could confirm the sighting. A local mechanic claimed Mark owed him money back then, and that he might have fled to avoid paying. Another man, a trucker who used to pass through the area regularly, said he picked up a hitchhiker in '95 who looked just like Mark, but the hitchhiker called himself Steve and said he was headed to Mexico. All of these leads dangled like threads, pulling the family in different directions, each with its own hint of truth. But none of them fit cleanly. And the more they pulled, the more tangled everything became. Just as they were about to give up, just as exhaustion and confusion threatened to take over, something unexpected happened. Another tape surfaced. One no one remembered filming. No label. No date. Just a blank VHS cassette buried inside an old box of decorations in the basement. The family gathered again, hesitant, their nerves raw from weeks of uncertainty. They pressed play. The screen crackled.
Static.
Then a handheld shot of the backyard. Same house, same lawn chairs, same aging tree in the corner. But the atmosphere felt different. Quieter.
Off.
And then, just at the edge of the frame, a familiar face appeared again. This time, he wasn't looking at the camera.
He was walking away. Slowly.
Into the woods behind the house. And he wasn't alone. The tape stopped playing suddenly, cutting to a wall of static that hissed across the room like a warning. At first, they thought the VHS had just degraded with age, but something didn't feel right. The abrupt ending came right as the man, Mark, or whoever it was, disappeared into the tree line with someone beside him. The other figure was smaller, hunched, possibly wearing a hooded jacket, but the resolution was too poor to be sure. They rewound it, paused it, played it in slow motion, but no matter what they tried, the face of the second person never came into focus. As the family sat in silence, trying to make sense of what they had seen, the power in the house flickered. Just once. But enough to rattle everyone. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe it was something else. That night, the tape went missing. They had left it sitting on the kitchen counter before bed. In the morning, it was gone. No one admitted to moving it. Doors were locked, windows untouched. They searched the entire house, even the trash, convinced someone must have mistakenly thrown it away. But it had vanished. Just like Mark had all those years ago. Caleb, always the skeptic, accused one of the younger family members of staging it for attention. But deep down, even he looked shaken. A missing person reappearing in old footage was one thing. A missing tape with direct evidence, gone without a trace, that was something else. It was no longer about curiosity. It was about control. Someone didn't want them digging any deeper. Later that day, a man showed up at the house. He said his name was Byron and that he used to work with Mark in the early '90s during a construction gig just outside Cincinnati. He was polite, older, a little too polished. Said he heard the family was asking questions again and wanted to help bring some closure. But what struck them was how much he already knew. Details that hadn't been made public, stories they hadn't shared online or with anyone outside the family. When asked how he heard they were revisiting the case, Byron claimed he still kept in touch with old friends and that news travels fast. Jessica didn't trust him from the start. She said something about his energy felt off, rehearsed, like he had practiced his words in the car. But the others were desperate for any kind of lead. Byron told them a story that cracked open a part of Mark's past none of them had ever heard. Apparently, years before he disappeared, Mark had gotten into some shady dealings. Not drugs, but money. There was a rumor that during a renovation project in Indiana, Mark and a few guys found something buried behind an old hotel wall, a hidden safe, maybe even cash or documents. Whatever it was, Byron said Mark didn't report it. Instead, he went quiet for weeks, avoided everyone, and then came back with a new truck and a nervous edge he couldn't hide. If the story was true, it could mean Mark was hiding from someone. Or something. Maybe it wasn't just a decision to leave. Maybe it was a necessity. But something about Byron's tone raised red flags. He talked too much without saying enough. And when Caleb asked him directly what was in the safe, Byron just smiled and said, "Let's just say it wasn't something you could sell on eBay." The family started to feel the pressure closing in. Conversations became tense. Everyone second-guessed each other. Jessica began waking up in the middle of the night, convinced someone had been outside her window. One morning, she found a single black and white photo taped to her car windshield, an old image of Mark with a note scribbled in ink across the top. "You're asking the wrong questions." She broke down, and the family had to decide whether to continue or walk away. But for some of them, it was already too late. The questions were out. The secrets had started to surface, and backing off now would only invite more silence. Then, something else surfaced. An old journal that had belonged to Mark, hidden deep in a basement crawlspace inside a waterproof container. At first glance, it seemed like random notes, phone numbers, some receipts, a few sketches. But tucked between the pages was something more disturbing, a hand-drawn map of the family's property. The woods. The house. Even a small X marked near the edge of the tree line where the figure had vanished in the second tape. No one could explain it. No one remembered him ever making a map. And on the final page, in shaky handwriting, was a message. "If they find this, I'm already gone. But someone else knows. Don't trust." That's where the page was torn. The torn journal page marked a turning point, but no one could have guessed just how deep the cracks in the story would go. The message ending in "don't trust" left every family member looking at each other with unease, unsure of who Mark had meant to warn them about. The ambiguity fed into the growing paranoia, and tensions that had once simmered quietly now began to boil over. Caleb, increasingly agitated and vocal, accused Jessica of planting the journal for attention. Jessica fired back, reminding him that she'd risked her safety by even coming back into their lives. The arguments didn't help. If anything, they clouded judgment and made it easier to overlook the next sign that something far more disturbing was at play. Roughly a week after the journal's discovery, Jessica received another anonymous letter, this time in the form of a manila envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside were two photographs, one grainy shot of the same wooded area from the VHS tape, and another of a motel room with a date scribbled in red ink on the back, October 3rd, 1995. That date meant nothing to Jessica, but when she showed the photo to the Lambert family, Aunt Sheila gasped. She remembered the room. It was where she and her late husband had stayed while passing through Ohio during a road trip. The same weekend, she claimed she felt a presence outside their motel door, but chalked it up to nerves and lack of sleep. The idea that Mark could have been watching his own relatives while in hiding, possibly just feet away, was both chilling and disorienting. But this new twist took the mystery beyond the original circle, because Sheila wasn't the only one connected to that motel. A former childhood friend of Mark's named Eli, someone the family hadn't spoken to in years, came forward after seeing a social media post about the reopened case. He said something had been bothering him for decades, and with all the noise now surrounding the tapes, he couldn't keep it in any longer. Back in '95, just before Mark's disappearance, Eli had received a single-page letter with no return address. The message was vague but unmistakably paranoid. "I'm being watched. If I disappear, it's because of what we found. Eli hadn't understood it at the time, figured it was part of some personal crisis or late-night rambling, and ultimately chose to ignore it. But after hearing about the map, the tapes, and the photos surfacing now, he realized the letter was never random. It had been a breadcrumb. To make things even murkier, Eli admitted something he had never told anyone. He and Mark had been involved in more than just construction gigs back in the early 90s. They did odd jobs, some legal, some not. One of them included cleaning out an abandoned government-owned facility on the outskirts of Indianapolis that had been shuttered for years. Eli remembered Mark being spooked by something they found there, a set of old documents sealed in plastic, stamped with Department of Energy logos and redacted names. Whatever it was, Mark took a few of the pages with him. Eli warned him not to, but Mark insisted they might be worth something. After that, everything changed. Mark became jumpy, distant, obsessed with watching his own back. Eli figured he was being dramatic until Mark vanished. Now, Eli believed someone had been watching both of them since that job. As wild as it sounded, it wasn't the first time the family heard whispers about government involvement. In the years after Mark disappeared, a few locals had mentioned sightings of strange black vans parked near rural properties. One old man even claimed he saw two agents in suits questioning people at a local diner days after Mark was last seen. But those rumors were dismissed as small-town folklore, the kind of stories people told when tragedy struck and there was no one to blame. Now, though, with the resurfaced journal, the threatening messages, and the motel photos, the idea that Mark had gotten caught up in something much bigger than a simple runaway theory started to make uncomfortable sense. As the family debated what to do with Eli's new information, another unexpected development knocked them off balance. The police officer who had quietly reopened the case, a young detective named Nolan, called to report that the original evidence box tied to Mark's disappearance had gone missing from storage. No official record of removal. No chain of custody. It was just gone. When pressed, Nolan admitted that only a few people even knew about the case being revisited, and fewer still had access to that particular storage facility. The only conclusion that made any sense was that someone was actively trying to bury the trail, someone with access and motive. Then came the strangest event yet. One night, just after midnight, Caleb received a video on his phone from an untraceable number. The footage was less than a minute long, shot from what looked like a moving vehicle. It showed a dark road flanked by thick woods, headlights bouncing over the uneven asphalt. And then, in the distance, a figure walking on the side of the road. Alone. The camera zoomed in just enough to make out something horrifying. It was Mark's face, older and worn, eyes locked directly on the camera as if he knew exactly who was watching. Caleb stared at the screen in disbelief, frozen. When he tried to replay it, the file was gone. No trace. Just like before. At this point, nothing felt solid anymore. Every new piece of evidence contradicted the last. Every person who came forward with information left behind more questions than answers. Even within the family, people were starting to turn on each other. Why had Sheila never mentioned the motel incident? Why did Caleb seem so resistant to looking deeper, almost like he had something to hide? And what exactly was Byron's real connection to Mark? His polished words and vague warnings seemed less like concern and more like calculated interference. Had he been sent to lead them off the trail? As the pressure mounted and the stakes grew higher, the line between truth and deception blurred beyond recognition. And just when they thought things couldn't get more complicated, a new tape arrived. No label, no return address, just a plain package left on the front porch in the middle of the night. They hadn't even opened it yet. But what they would see on that tape would change everything they thought they knew. The night they opened the new tape, everything shifted from eerie curiosity to visceral fear. Jessica had insisted they wait until morning, convinced that watching it in daylight would somehow lessen the impact. But Caleb refused. He said they couldn't keep running in circles, that answers were slipping away every hour they delayed. So, in the dim light of the living room, they gathered again, the same way they had that first night weeks ago. The tape hissed as it fed into the old VCR, the static flickering like a warning that no one could hear. Then the footage began, grainy but recent, far too recent. It was security camera footage from a gas station only 10 miles away. The timestamp was from just 3 days prior. At first, the scene looked normal. A few customers filling their tanks. A man buying snacks. Nothing out of place. But then, just as the camera panned to the side, a figure stepped into view. It was Jessica. She was walking to her car alone, wearing the same jacket she wore last week. The eerie part wasn't just seeing herself on the screen. It was what came next. Another man appeared, a few steps behind her, standing near the pump, never looking directly at her, but clearly watching. He didn't buy gas. He didn't move. He stood there until Jessica drove off, then turned and walked out of frame. The footage cut to static again. That's when she knew, beyond any doubt, that someone was following her. Someone who had access to surveillance tapes and the means to manipulate fear like a weapon. And whoever sent this tape wasn't trying to help. They were sending a message. Jessica didn't sleep that night. Her thoughts were a storm of questions with no safe place to land. Was it the same man from the motel photo? Was it Byron in disguise? Or someone she hadn't even considered yet, someone closer? Every creak in the hallway became a threat. Every shadow outside the window a presence she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed around 2 a.m., and when she picked it up, there was nothing but static on the other end. No voice. No breathing. Just that same haunting white noise from the tape. She dropped the phone and backed away as if it might explode. Her chest tightened with the realization that this wasn't just about Mark anymore. Someone had shifted their focus to her. The next morning brought no clarity, only more chaos. Eli didn't show up to their scheduled meeting. They waited at the coffee shop for over an hour before deciding to check in on him. His phone went straight to voicemail. When they arrived at his house, the door was open just a crack. Not kicked in, not broken, just slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry or wanted it to look that way. The place was undisturbed at first glance. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture. But something felt wrong. His computer had been wiped, the hard drive removed cleanly, not hastily. His notes, pages he'd scribbled on during their meetings, were missing. The only thing left behind was a single envelope on the kitchen counter addressed to Jessica in red ink. Inside was a Polaroid photo of a dense wooded trail. On the back, it simply read, "You're next." Panic turned to dread, and dread began to morph into a quiet, desperate rage. Who was doing this, and why? Jessica felt trapped in a game she never agreed to play. Her memories started to betray her. She replayed every conversation she'd had with Mark years ago, wondering if she'd missed something, some clue he'd tried to leave behind. A look, a phrase, a warning masked as a joke. But the more she tried to focus, the more her mind splintered. She began to doubt even herself. Had she been manipulated from the start? Was she digging into something real? Or had she been led here, baited, by someone who needed her to see these things at just the right moment? Was the real trap not the footage, but her reaction to it? Back at the house, things weren't faring any better. Caleb became reclusive, refusing to engage in any more family discussions. He spent his time in the basement now, always working on something no one else was allowed to see. Jessica tried confronting him, but he brushed her off with half answers and vague excuses. Then she remembered. The map in Mark's journal had pointed to a location just yards from that basement wall. Had Caleb known more than he let on all along? When she searched the basement after he left, she found something he hadn't meant for her to see. A fragment of film, the kind used in old camcorders, sealed inside a rusted tin. On it, barely legible in faded ink, were the words, "Original copy, Property Room A." It wasn't part of the family's original home videos. It belonged to someone else. Maybe Mark. Maybe not. But it had been hidden, and now it was in her hands. Jessica's world was unraveling, every thread leading to more confusion. She couldn't go to the police, not after the evidence box disappeared under their watch. She couldn't trust anyone, not even her own blood. The past, long buried, was clawing its way to the surface, and with every new clue came the weight of deeper danger. Someone was orchestrating this, a puppet master pulling strings from the shadows, playing on fear, doubt, and the need for truth. Whoever they weren't done. And Jessica knew one thing now with absolute certainty. This wasn't about uncovering what happened to Mark anymore. This was about surviving whatever had started when he disappeared. And the moment she believed she was in control of the story, someone else rewrote the ending. But the real twist was still waiting. Because in that rusted tin, behind the fragment of film, was something else. A photograph not of Mark, not of any family member, but of a girl. Standing in front of the same wooded path, holding a sign with today's date scrawled in red marker. And her eyes looked just like Jessica's. Jessica stared at the photo in her trembling hands, her breath caught between disbelief and dread. The girl looked almost identical to her, but younger, maybe 10 or 11, with the same eyes, same chin, and even the same subtle dimple near her left cheek. The image was dated for that very day. But what was truly unnerving wasn't just the resemblance, it was the background. Behind the girl was a faded, moss-covered signpost that Jessica recognized immediately. It belonged to a long-abandoned trail behind her late grandmother's property in upstate New York. A place Jessica hadn't visited since she was a child. A place she had barely remembered until now. And that's when it hit her. Not as a revelation, but as a memory uncoiling from the depths of her subconscious. She had been there. She had met that girl. But the memory had been buried so deep, it took the shock of seeing the photo to shake it loose. Back then, she thought the girl was just another neighborhood kid. Quiet, strange, never said much, but always seemed to be watching her. They only spent a few afternoons together, playing in the woods before Jessica's family abruptly cut ties with that side of the family and never went back. But now she realized something had been off even then. The girl always seemed to know things Jessica had never told anyone. And one day, she was just gone.
No goodbye.
No explanation. Just vanished. Jessica had assumed her young mind had filled in the blanks with imagination, but what if it wasn't her mind playing tricks at all? What if she had stumbled into something all those years ago and her family had deliberately made her forget? Fueled by equal parts terror and obsession, Jessica confronted her mother, who had remained quiet through most of the investigation, claiming she didn't want to reopen old wounds. But when Jessica showed her the photo, everything changed. Her mother's face drained of color, and she sat down without a word. It took a long time for her to speak, and when she did, the story unraveled in a way that made Jessica question her entire childhood. Mark wasn't just her uncle. He was her biological father. The truth had been buried in family shame and hidden affairs. He and her mother had a brief relationship before he left, voluntarily, she had always been told, but in truth, he had been forced out after discovering something dark buried in their family's history. Her mother explained that when Mark found out about a program their grandfather had participated in, some secretive psychological study in the late 70s involving children and memory manipulation, he started asking too many questions. That's when things went sideways. The program had ties to local government and law enforcement, including individuals who had the power to erase records, disappear people, and cover things up with chilling precision. Mark had wanted to protect Jessica from whatever their family had been part of. But the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. And the final straw was that photo of the girl in the woods, because that girl wasn't Jessica. That girl was the result of the program. A clone. A test subject. A mirror made to replicate a child from the study. And Mark had found her, documented it, and tried to expose everything. Jessica's head spun as everything she thought she knew collapsed in on itself. The tapes, the letters, the surveillance, it wasn't just about a missing man anymore. It was about a decades-old experiment in memory suppression, cloning, and behavioral conditioning. Her family had been pawns in something far larger than they'd ever imagined. The repressed memories, the missing people, the strange gaps in time, they weren't accidents. They were by design. And suddenly, she understood why the threats had started after they watched that first tape. It had activated something, either in her memory or in someone else's directive. And now that she was getting too close, the system was correcting itself. But the betrayal cut even deeper. Because when she finally gathered enough courage to confront Caleb, who had remained eerily quiet throughout the past few days, she found him gone. His basement workspace cleaned out. His phone left behind on the kitchen table, wiped of data. What she did find, however, hidden in the ceiling tiles above the basement, was a lockbox. Inside were photos of Jessica as a baby, far more than any normal brother should have had. And tucked into the bottom, a letter from Mark addressed to Caleb. It was handwritten and brief, but clear. Protect her. When the truth surfaces, they'll come for her first. If I disappear, it's because you let them get too close. Now, Jessica didn't know who to fear more, the shadowy group behind the experiment, or her own family members who had kept so many secrets for so long. Everything was unraveling. The past wasn't just catching up, it had been controlling her present all along. And as she looked again at the photo of that girl in the woods with her same face and today's date, one terrifying thought refused to leave her mind. What if she wasn't the original at all? What if she was just another version? One that finally woke up. Jessica stood in the doorway of the basement, the weight of the lockbox pressing heavy in her arms and her chest thudding like a warning drum inside her. The air smelled different down there now, stale, like it had been sealed off from reality for years, hiding something rotting just below the surface. Her fingers traced the edge of the photo again, the image of the girl with her face staring back, the trail behind her twisting into the trees like a path she was meant to follow. Everything in her world was starting to blur, the past and present, memory and manipulation, truth and performance. But the most crushing part wasn't the fear of what was coming, it was the looming certainty that someone she loved had helped set it all in motion. And it was time to find out who. She didn't want to believe it was Caleb. He'd been her anchor through all of this, even when he was distant or evasive, even when his answers didn't line up. But the evidence couldn't be ignored. The extra photos of her childhood. The letter from Mark pleading for her protection. The fact that he disappeared just when things started to fracture. Jessica couldn't let it sit any longer. She drove to the one place she hadn't wanted to return to, her father's old cabin upstate, the one Caleb had inherited after Mark vanished. She hadn't been there since she was a teenager, and pulling up to it now, shrouded in fog and silence, felt like stepping into someone else's nightmare. The curtains were drawn, the front door locked, but Jessica knew where the spare key was. No one ever moved it. Inside, the air was cold and still. Dust coated the furniture, but a lamp in the back hallway was on. She found Caleb in the study, seated with his back to her, flipping through pages in a thick binder. When he turned around, he didn't look surprised to see her. He looked tired, beaten, as if he had aged 10 years in just a few days. He didn't try to deny anything. He just sat there quietly as Jessica laid out every question that had been plaguing her. What did he know? Why had he hidden the film canister? Why had he never told her the truth about Mark? And the question that scared her most, was she even who she thought she was? Caleb took a long breath before answering, and his words didn't come with anger or regret. They came with a kind of grief that shook her deeper than rage ever could. He explained that when Jessica was just a toddler, Mark had stumbled onto a private research initiative cloaked as a medical foundation. It was funded by a covert branch of psychological testing, some Cold War leftover that had never officially been shut down. They were experimenting with memory suppression, behavioral rewrites, and in some cases, controlled cloning. Mark had taken Jessica from one of the facilities he was investigating, convinced she was in danger. But there were gaps, even in Mark's understanding. Caleb had been pulled into the secret later, sworn to protect her and to make sure she never remembered. That's why he stayed close. That's why he made her believe they were just cousins. But the fallout had been far worse than they imagined. Anyone who got too close to the truth either disappeared or was made to forget. And now that Jessica had triggered something, possibly with the first tape, whoever was still pulling the strings wanted her silenced.
Permanently.
Caleb told her there was only one way forward: to leave, disappear, erase herself before they could. He had everything ready: documents, new IDs, a route. He begged her not to keep chasing the truth. But Jessica couldn't do it.
Not now.
Not after seeing the girl in the woods. Not after realizing there may be others out there just like her, living ghosts caught in the same machinery. The argument turned bitter. Caleb shouted that truth wasn't worth dying for. Jessica fired back that living a lie was worse, than any threat. That if she didn't fight for the truth now, she'd be running for the rest of her life. And then he said it without meaning to, maybe, or perhaps because he had no other way to stop her. "You're not the original, Jess. You never were." The words cracked the room open like thunder. For a second, everything froze. The air left her lungs. He tried to explain, saying Mark had found a body, one that matched her DNA, and that's when he knew. The real Jessica had died. This version, the one who had grown up, lived, fought, and cried, was one of the experiments that somehow survived and escaped. She wasn't stolen. She was remade. Jessica couldn't speak. Her hands went numb. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It wasn't even fear. It was a splintering of identity so complete, it knocked the breath from her soul. And now, she was left with an impossible choice: walk away from everything and pretend she was someone else forever, or push forward into a past that might not have a place for her at all. The cabin felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. Outside, the fog thickened, and a car engine rumbled in the distance, one that didn't belong to them. Someone had followed her here. Someone who didn't care whether she was the original or the copy. Only that she knew too much. Caleb moved to the window and froze. Jessica didn't wait.
She ran.
Through the back door, across the yard, into the woods where the trees grew so thick they felt like a second skin. Her thoughts blurred, adrenaline carrying her farther from the cabin and deeper into the very forest where that girl had once stood. But even as her legs burned and her lungs heaved, she knew this wasn't escape. This was a reckoning. And someone out there had been waiting a long time for her to return. The deeper Jessica pushed into the woods, the more the world behind her disappeared. Caleb, the cabin, the lies, the betrayals. Every branch that whipped across her face, every thorn that tore at her skin, felt like it was stripping away the layers of everything she thought she knew. She didn't know where she was running, only that she had to keep going. Somewhere beyond the fog, a car door slammed. Then voices. They weren't shouting. They were calm, coordinated, deliberate. These weren't random people. They were professionals. Organized. And they knew exactly where she was headed. After what felt like hours, Jessica collapsed against a decaying tree trunk, breath ragged and skin slick with sweat and dirt. The forest was deathly still, too quiet for comfort. But ahead, just visible through a break in the trees, was something she hadn't expected, a clearing. And in the center, half swallowed by time and nature, stood a rusted fence surrounding a crumbling concrete structure. The kind of building you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. The kind that wasn't on any map. She slipped through a gap in the fence and moved toward the door. Her heart thudded against her ribs like it wanted to escape before she saw what was inside. The building wasn't empty. Inside, it was cold and sterile. Concrete floors, steel beams, wires snaking from ceiling to floor, some still faintly humming with power. Old security cameras blinked red, like eyes that had just woken up. On one of the walls hung a corkboard covered in photos, papers, and red strings like something out of a conspiracy thriller. But this wasn't fiction. Jessica recognized faces, hers at different ages, Caleb, Mark, and dozens of others. Some marked with red XS, others with dates and notes written in tight, clinical handwriting. There were children, some barely toddlers, listed with codes instead of names. One photo showed a row of kids in hospital gowns, all with her eyes. Jessica's mind reeled. This wasn't just about her. This was a system, a decades-long operation designed to create, monitor, and control people like her. Memory-tested subjects, behavioral clones, experimented on from birth. And she hadn't been the only one. Not even close. She found files in a locked drawer, names she vaguely remembered from childhood, neighbors, classmates who had seemed off. People who'd vanished without explanation, or moved away suddenly. And as she flipped through the files, the floor fell out from beneath her. There was one labeled Emily Reyes. Her best friend from grade school, the one who'd disappeared after 5th grade and whom nobody talked about again. Jessica had always believed her family just relocated. But here was her file, tagged with trial terminated and a red fingerprint across the bottom corner. Before she could process it, the door slammed open behind her. A figure stepped in, not wearing a mask or a uniform, but familiar. Too familiar. It was her mother. Jessica froze. Her throat locked. For a second, they stared at each other, mother and daughter, but now something more, or maybe something less. Her mother stepped forward slowly, eyes tired but firm, like someone who had been carrying a secret for too long. And then she said something Jessica never expected to hear. "You were never supposed to remember. None of you were." The words hit harder than any blow. Jessica backed away, her voice caught between rage and heartbreak. Her mother confessed that she had once been part of the project, not a lead scientist, but a handler, someone assigned to raise and report on test subjects embedded into normal environments. Jessica had been her first assignment, and over time, the lines blurred. She stopped seeing Jessica as a project and started loving her like a daughter. But love didn't undo the system. There were protocols, check-ins, memory wipes. And when Mark found out, when he tried to expose it all, they labeled him unstable, discredited him, and eventually silenced him. Not killed, just erased. Broken. Jessica demanded to know how deep it went. Who else was involved? Her mother hesitated, then pulled out a device from her coat pocket and handed it over. A thumb drive, worn and scratched, but still intact. "This has everything," she said. "Names, records, locations. But once you open it, they'll know. You'll have about an hour before they come to shut it down. You can use it to tell the world, or destroy it, and they'll leave you alone. You'll disappear, but you'll live." Jessica's hands trembled as she took it. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why she wasn't worth saving the first time, why the truth was always behind closed doors and blood-stained secrets.
But there was no time.
Outside, more voices echoed through the trees. Whoever was coming wasn't far behind. Her mother moved toward the exit. "I can't protect you anymore," she said, without emotion. "You were never mine to keep." And then she left. Jessica stood in the center of a truth too big to hold, a thumb drive that could burn the world down in one hand, and a childhood memory of love that might have been programmed in the other. And somewhere outside, the people who had built her like a machine were closing in to shut her down for good. Jessica ran through the dense trees with the thumb drive clutched in her hand like it was the only real thing left in the world. The forest seemed to close in tighter with every step, branches clawing at her skin, roots tangling around her boots. Her mind was a cyclone of confusion, betrayal, and raw fury. Everything she had believed about her life, her family, her memories, her identity, had been nothing more than curated lies, data points in an experiment she had never consented to. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. Her will. Her refusal to disappear quietly. She reached the abandoned service road, the one Caleb had used years ago to take her fishing as a child, or so she thought. In reality, it had probably just been a way to keep her within range of the system. But tonight, that same road would lead her to the truth, or to the end. The safe house was hidden behind an old ranger station, camouflaged with broken signage and decades of weathered neglect. Jessica approached it slowly, heart pounding against her ribs like a ticking bomb. She had followed the coordinates from the final file, Site 0, the one listed in red on the drive, the one marked Authorized Access Only, Tier Omega. The door was ajar. Someone was already inside. She crept in, flashlight gripped tight in her left hand, the drive in her right. The moment she crossed the threshold, the floor hummed beneath her feet, and a wall of monitors flickered on one by one. Then she saw him. Sitting at a desk in the middle of the room, casually flipping through a folder as if none of this chaos had touched him at all, was Dr. Adrian Kepler. He was older now, with silver hair and a posture of effortless control, the kind that only comes from decades of pulling invisible strings. He looked up and smiled, not with surprise, but with recognition, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Jessica. Or, should I say, Subject E12. His voice was calm, surgical, completely detached from the hurricane her life had become. She stepped forward slowly, every muscle in her body screaming to lunge at him, to end it. But she needed to know why. She needed the last piece. Kepler began to talk, not like a villain monologuing, but like a man delivering a report. He explained the project's origins, a covert offshoot of MKUltra, designed to create emotionally adaptable replicas of key individuals in society, children of power players, influencers, whistleblowers. When someone died or went rogue, a backup would take their place. Memory implants, behavioral conditioning, DNA replication. And the public never questioned a thing. Jessica hadn't been the only one, there were hundreds. But something had gone wrong with her generation. The memories started to fragment. Some of them began remembering things they shouldn't, people they had never met, places they had never been. And the system couldn't handle variables. That's when she realized the truth. The girl in the VHS tape, the one who looked like her but stood silently in the woods, that had been her. Not a memory. Not a clone. It had been a reset. A version of herself that had tried to escape once before and failed. They'd erased that attempt, wiped her clean, and reinserted her into the narrative. The tape was the only leftover fragment, a glitch in their perfect story. That's why they wanted it gone. That's why Caleb had lied. Why her mother had hidden. Why they kept trying to make her forget. But now it was too late. Kepler stood, his voice lower now, less clinical. You're not supposed to be here, Jessica. You're a threat to national security, to scientific progress. But mostly to yourself. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a sleek black remote with a single red button. This entire facility is wired. One press and everything in here, including us, vanishes. Jessica didn't move. She watched him closely. Then she held up the thumb drive. I've already uploaded it, she lied. Every file. Every name. It's live. If I disappear, the world sees it all. She didn't know if he'd believe her. But she needed him to hesitate. And he did. Just long enough. She lunged. The two collided with a violent crash, the remote skidding across the floor. Kepler fought with surprising strength for a man his age, his hands going for her throat. But Jessica had adrenaline and rage. Years of it. She drove her knee into his ribs, grabbed the flashlight, and smashed it into the side of his head. He crumpled to the ground, groaning. But before she could retrieve the remote or find a way to secure him, a sound behind her made her freeze. Footsteps. She turned to find Caleb standing in the doorway. He looked haggard, wounded, but alive. I had to follow you, he said, voice strained. I couldn't let you face him alone. But Jessica didn't move.
Not yet.
Not until she saw what he would do. Caleb walked past her, picked up the remote, and pointed it directly at Kepler. You're done, he said coldly. But Kepler laughed through bloodied lips. You think exposing us will stop anything? They'll just move underground. You'll be hunted forever. You and her both. And then it happened. Not from Kepler, but from Caleb. He turned the remote, not toward Kepler, but toward Jessica. I'm sorry, he said. They have my sister. Jessica's heart stopped. The betrayal was instant, sharp, and final. Caleb had never left the program. He was working both sides, feeding her just enough to lead her to the core. And now that she had it all, the evidence, the names, they couldn't let her walk out. But just as his finger moved to press the button, the power flickered. The monitors behind them blinked. And on every screen, a video began to play. The tape. The VHS tape. The girl in the woods. Jessica. The signal was real. Her bluff wasn't a bluff anymore. Someone had helped her. From the outside, the screens exploded into static as the system overloaded, alarms shrieking through the building. Kepler screamed. Caleb turned, but Jessica was already moving. She tackled him hard, the remote flying from his hands. She didn't stop. Not until he was unconscious. And by the time she stood up, breath ragged, the entire facility was on fire. Somewhere, someone had triggered a failsafe. But not before the data spread. She ran out of the building just as it lit the forest sky in orange and smoke. Behind her, the past burned. But ahead, for the first time, was something else. Not safety. Not answers, but freedom. And as she disappeared into the night, a final monitor, hidden deep in a bunker far from where the fire raged, flickered to life. A shadowy figure leaned forward, smiled, and muttered to no one in particular. Subject E13 activated. The cycle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Weeks had passed since the fire consumed the facility, and with it, much of the tangible proof Jessica had risked everything to uncover.